This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Happy Wednesday. How's everybody doing today? Well, if you're looking to protect some of your savings, turn to Silver Gold Bull or precious metals, I guess. When it comes to silver and gold, Silver Gold Bull has a wide variety of the best value silver for every budget, and a whole lot to do with gold as well. And you can simply text or email Graham down in the show notes for details, whether you're a seasoned investor or new to precious metals. He'll work with you to answer your questions and recommend the best products to meet your investing goals. And any questions you may have around buying, selling, storing, or using your retirement accounts to invest in precious metals, he can do that. silvergoldbull.ca.com, whichever side of the line you're on, you can visit them there. And any purchase you're making, just make sure to reference the Sean Newman Podcast. Once again, all the contact details down in the show notes. Bow Valley Credit Union. Buying and selling Bitcoin has never been easier. They've developed the first in-Canada Bitcoin gateway. With just a few clicks, you can buy Bitcoin directly from your Bow Valley Credit Union account. And any of the Bitcoin you purchase through your Bitcoin gateway is real, truly yours, securely stored, insured, and never leveraged. Custody is provided with you with no risk of losing seed phrases, complicated technology, or fear of hackers. Just visit bowvalleycu.com for more information on that. Diamond 7 Meats. Well, Diamond 7 Meats here in Lloydminster is a family-run business with over 26 years of service, offering more than just retail cuts. They provide livestock processing for farmers and ranchers in Saskatchewan and Alberta, including custom sausage making for both domestic and wild game. If you don't have your own animals, there's Retail Sales Connect, which will connect you directly with the producers, offering sides or quarters of beef, pork, and lamb. Their experienced staff can help you fill your freezer with exactly what you need. You can find them on the north end of town, Highway 17 and 67th Street North, or you can give them a call today, 306-825-9718. Caleb Taves, Renegade Acres. When it comes to concrete, these gentlemen certainly know what they're doing, and they have the community spotlight this week. Quick Dick McDick live November 22nd in Lashburn. It's a fundraiser for the Lashburn Elementary School. They're building a playground fundraiser. You have the MASH bill, January 17th. We're going to be in Calmar, just west of Leduc. We're down under 12 teams available for that. You can also sign up as an individual. Links for that down in the show notes, folks. We have Substack, free to subscribe to, and week in review every Sunday, 5 p.m. You can also become a paid member and support what I do here on the show and get some behind-the-scenes footage and into some different conversations that we do on a weekly basis. We have the Cornerstone Forum returns March 28th. It's going to be at the Calgary Weston Airport Hotel and venue. It's all in one. So you can fly into Calgary, get a 24/7 shuttle to the hotel, and then not have to leave it for the weekend because the forum will be there. So that is coming. We got some new people coming this year. Chad Prather, Vince Lanchi, and Karen Katowski among that list. We've also got some returnees, Tom Luongo, Alex Kreiner, Matt Arrett, and Tom Bodrovics reprising his role in one of the host chairs. 222 Minutes is going to be back on stage as well. So there's some familiar faces, there's some new faces, and there's more to come. But you can get your early bird tickets on sale until December 31st. So you got just under 2 months for the early bird prices to get your tickets for the Cornerstone Forum March 28th back in Calgary. That is all down in the show notes as well. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, make sure to subscribe, make sure to leave a review, and make sure to share with a friend if you're enjoying the content. All right, let's get on to that. Tale of the tape. Our first guest is the founder of Alberta Classical Academy. Our second is a professor of law at Queen's University. I'm talking about Caylan Ford and Bruce Pardy. So buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast. Today I'm joined by Caylan Ford and Bruce Pardy. I'm finding out a lot about you two and the fact you know each other, which is great. I thought this would be a fun conversation with the Alberta Teachers Strike, albeit in the rearview mirror now as kids are back in school. But there's been a whole lot of different things come out. So I guess first off, Caylan, Bruce, thanks for hopping on the podcast today.
Great to be with you, Sean. Thanks for the invitation.
I guess the notwithstanding clause gets used. And maybe I'll start with Bruce. Caylan, please hop in here whenever you feel. But there's been a whole bunch of talk now about the notwithstanding clause, Bruce, is war on the workers, and the ATA coming out saying, this is abuse of power. And, they've been releasing polls that show majority of people agree with the teachers and not the government and blah, blah, blah. The notwithstanding clause, maybe we could just start there and your thoughts on the use of it.
Oh, I think Danielle Smith and the UCP are entirely within their proper rights to use the notwithstanding clause. I think it's an entirely legitimate thing. It is part of the charter. So critics of a notwithstanding clause say, oh, you can't use a notwithstanding clause. It will undermine the charter. It is part of the charter. It is part of the deal that was made to put the charter into being. It's part of the architecture of the charter and the Constitution. It is basically the last vestige of legislative supremacy as far as the charter goes. Before we had the charter, the legislatures had the last word on things, essentially. And now the courts have the last word on things under the charter. And Section 33 was put in there to give the legislatures the last word in some circumstances. And the critics of the notwithstanding clause want restrictions to be put on its use that are not in the text of the charter, which is not the deal that was made. Right. So I got no problem with the Alberta government using it. In this circumstance or in lots of others. In fact, I've gone so far as to say that the courts in this country have taken on their supremacy so enthusiastically and wander outside their lane so willingly that I wouldn't look badly upon a government that basically said we're using the notwithstanding clause all the time because we don't trust our courts.
Yeah, this is a very novel experience, Sean. As I mentioned, I for once agree with everything that Bruce has said, except Bruce, you kind of seem to be going down the road of saying that with the charter we now have judicial supremacy, but no, because of Section 33, that's supposed to preserve the supremacy of the democratically elected legislature. And again, I think there's something terribly sad and irresponsible about the way that the use of Section 33, the notwithstanding clause, gets invoked. I heard from a friend yesterday that they were saying her son's biology teacher was sort of in tears at being forced back to work and said, this is an authoritarian government that is undermining democracy, that is taking away my rights, and I'm refusing to teach. And so this person was obviously distressed, but they're distressed because they've been misinformed about what's happening. So for one, again, democracy means that democratically elected lawmakers are the ones who make the laws. And the people have recourse to hold them accountable if they disagree with what they do. So when, for example, Danielle Smith's government legislates teachers back to work, if teachers are not happy with that, they have the opportunity to vote them out and vote in a different government. That's democracy. What is not democratic is where courts get to say, no, democratically elected lawmakers don't get to do this because we're going to have a freewheeling interpretation of the Constitution and are basically going to take lawmaking into our own hands. And that's what the Supreme Court has been doing. And so, as Bruce said, the preservation of democracy under these circumstances actually requires elected governments to start using the notwithstanding clause a heck of a lot more. In this case, we're dealing with a constitutional right to strike, which was not a constitutional right until 2015, when the Supreme Court, in defiance of all previous jurisprudence, just sort of said out of thin air, we're going to give benediction to this right, out of nowhere, just because they wanted to. So that's why the notwithstanding clause now was attached to this back to work legislation, because the Supreme Court has invented a new constitutional right in very recent memory.
So 2015, sorry, Bruce, 2015, up until that point, there was no right to strike. Now there's a right to strike. It's protected. And that's where all the anger is coming from. And when you say misinformed, maybe some of the people who don't fully understand what's going on.
this point is very important. So the charter, this is all under Section 2D of the charter, the right of association. The Section 2 rights are supposed to be written as negative rights, as in the right to be free from government interference. So if the government leaves you alone, they are fulfilling Section 2 rights, Section 2D association rights. And the Supreme Court comes along, just as Caylan has said, and it invents a positive right to a collective bargaining process and the right to strike, meaning you are entitled to require your provincial government to legislate you these particular kinds of rights. And so the need to use the notwithstanding clause in this situation would not exist without the activism of the Supreme Court. So the argument is specious. It makes no sense. If the charter had been interpreted by the court to mean what it says, then the notwithstanding clause would not need to be used here. It is all a court-produced problem.
Forgive me for asking this stupid question, but you have the charter, it gets written out. What gives courts I don't know what word to use next, so you two just maybe fill it in. Is it right or obligation or whatever?
Power.
To add to the document.
Power. The word is power.
Sure. What gives them the power to do that?
The lack of any other power to stop them. If you want to be literal, here's the technical legal reason why the courts do whatever they want. Because there is nothing to stop them. In particular, we're talking about the Supreme Court of Canada. Supreme Court of Canada, we think that judicial decisions are restricted, by precedent and reasoning and principles of statutory interpretation and logic. Those are more apparent than real. The Supreme Court of Canada can actually come to whatever decision it wants because it cannot be appealed and it can't be overturned as far as the charter is concerned. So they have the final word, except for the notwithstanding clause, right? So it is simply a function of power. There's no check and balance to stop them from doing essentially whatever they want.
Including they're not democratically elected.
Correct.
Right. And I think this is a compelling reason why we should cleave to some idea of legislative or even executive supremacy rather than judicial supremacy. Because if the courts make bad decisions that are clearly irrational, that are offensive to sort of basic moral sensibilities of the people, there's no recourse.
And we should add that under the Canadian Constitution, it is the federal government that appoints judges to the highest courts in each of the provinces, right? So in Alberta, which is, one of the most right-leaning provinces in the country, the judges have been appointed over the past decade by the Liberal government in Ottawa to Alberta's courts.
How long is an appointment?
Oh, well, the Supreme Court of Canada until 75. So you could be appointed, let's say you're appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada, in your mid-50s. You'll sit on the court for 20 years.
Okay, I'm going to wrap my brain around this. I feel like maybe I'm just the layman here. Probably am. You get given, in the courts, you get given a set of laws that you're supposed to abide by. And what I'm hearing, and I feel like I've heard this before out of maybe both of you, is now what you have is interpretation of it, not actually what it says. Yes. So this isn't up to date with where we are, which shouldn't that be the courts going, listen, lawmakers, we need to update these, not make rulings on the way we think they should be.
Do you want to talk about living trees, Bruce?
Sure. So the living tree is a philosophy of interpretation that they apply to both the Constitution and statutes. Living tree basically means we're going to interpret the document to mean whatever is necessary in the evolving nature of our society. What that really means is we're not subject or restricted to the text, and we'll do whatever we think is right. We're going to make social policy in accordance with the way we think society exists right now or with the way it should be. It is it is a signaling of judicial activism.
And there are some members of the Supreme Court in particular who actually believe that it is their role, the role of this handful of justices, to be the final arbiters of moral contestations in society.
And
No
final
one
arbiter.
elected them.
Sorry.
They're not representative of the population, but they have decided that this is their role and their prerogative.
And it just so happens that that very phrase, the final arbiters, is the phrase that now retired Justice Rosalie Abella used in her op-ed and her speech to describe the proper role, in her view, of the Supreme Court, the final arbiters of which contested values in society should triumph. That's what they think their job is.
So this only gets worse then. Right? Like this, like that right there, that scares me. This doesn't get better in a year's time. This only gets worse.
No, sure. Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, how much has our society changed over 20 years? Before they were the above everything, the power, nobody can keep them in check. We're going to make the moral decisions for society. Before we had that, how much did society change in a 20-year span? Now you go in a 20-year span where you're the moral adjudicator of what should happen in society with all the pressures and the activists and everything else. This only gets worse.
So if I can, Sean, there's
Yes.
a perspective on this that I have that maybe Caylan doesn't share. And that is everything that we've said that I we obviously agree on this point. But the more difficult point is this, that the contest over the notwithstanding clause reflects a bigger problem, which is that courts in Canada don't tend to protect individual liberties as they're written in the Charter. But the problem is that neither do legislatures. So I agree with the democratic principle that legislatures should have a role in this, and they certainly should be legitimately able to use the notwithstanding clause. But an awful lot of legislatures in Canada don't do a good job at this either, and that was the whole reason for the rationale for putting the Charter in the first place, right? So I'm sure we can all think of situations where a legislature in Canada, whether it's Parliament in Ottawa or a provincial legislature, has passed a bill or wants to pass a bill, which would be catastrophic to our ability to decide things for ourselves, like during COVID. Like lots of people tried to go to the courts during COVID to say, they can't do this, right? And that's why you have a charter. So in other words, the contest over the notwithstanding clause is a contest between two bad choices, be ruled by the elites in the courts or be ruled by the mob in the legislature. And neither one of those two choices is working out very well.
Caylan?
I am prevaricating between whether I should raise another recent terrible Supreme Court decision and go down that rabbit hole, or if we should pull this back to teachers' strikes.
Well, now I'm curious. You can't do that. You can't float a thought, because now I'm curious what you're thinking of.
Well, right after Danielle Smith, her government invoked the notwithstanding clause, she suggested that the federal government should also invoke the notwithstanding clause to defend their the statutory mandatory minimum sentence for child pornography possession,
right,
which the Supreme Court has just said 1 year as a mandatory minimum for indictable offenses of child pornography is unconstitutional. So again, they've invented this. They used sort of a ridiculous hypothetical scenario to decide that there's some far-fetched hypothetical under which a 1 year mandatory minimum might seem onerous, and so they've basically invented the claim that that's unconstitutional. But this is it's a bit of a tangent.
This is what I mean. It's going to get worse. Yeah. This is not getting better anytime soon when you have that level of insanity happening, right? Like it's getting worse.
Well, can we go back to the teachers just for a moment?
Yes.
So my perspective on the teachers, though, is this, that the conflict about the teachers strike comes as a result of an accepted way of doing things that we don't even notice now. And it's that way of doing things that is the source of the problem, right? So what you have with the teachers and the government in Alberta are two monopolies. You have two monopolies. The government controls all the public schools and all the teaching positions in those schools. And the union controls all the people who are going to do that work. You got a contest between two monopolies. And this problem with the strike occurs because you've got those two monopolies fighting about who gets to dictate the terms. And the solution to that, I mean, the short-term solution may be the notwithstanding clause. Sure, that's fine. But the larger picture solution is don't have monopolies. Monopolies don't work. The government should not be providing public education. I know that's an extreme view or going to sound like it, but that's always what I've thought, because this is exactly the kind of problem that you get into. And the union should not have the power to control everybody who wants to teach. I mean, if you get rid of those two monopolies, then what you would get is competition, supply, and demand in a market. And then people will be paid what they're worth.
Yep. And so the one of the very few exceptions to the monopoly of the ATA is charter schools, whose teachers are not allowed under the ATA's own bylaws to be members. So the schools that I established, for example, we were consistently in school during the teacher strike, as were, I think, all of the other charter schools in the province. But that only accounts for like 2% of the province's students.
But in fairness, Caylan, if you had wild ambitions to grow that sucker, you would be flooded with students, would you not?
We do have wild ambitions, and we have thousands of students on our wait list. This is a problem of access to capital. Not only, Bruce, does the government have a monopoly on public education, but they also don't let us even borrow money to finance our own capital projects. We're completely dependent on them to fund them. So our expansion has to go on the timelines that the government dictates.
Right. So in a way, this is still the government controlling this sort of outlier way of doing things in accordance with its own requirements.
Yeah.
So I will stand corrected. I should have known you had wild ambitions. I just looked at the wait list and I'm like, holy man, if you just went caution to the wind and opened everything up, your enrollment would go crazy. But when you point out the fact that, for a capital project, you got to rely on the government's timeline. Well, then again, the handcuffs are put back on and it becomes a slower pace at what you can grow.
Yeah, there's that handcuff. And then there's the other, which is we're also obligated to have teachers who are certificated by the government of Alberta's, the Ministry of Education certification branch, which typically means they have to have a Bachelor of Education degree.
Right.
Which is not a particularly useful degree.
That's very diplomatic of you, Caylan.
Not a very useful degree. That's not a statement about the quality of the people who have that degree. It's just the degree itself is of very little utility, and there are huge opportunity costs. If you're, say, a mid-career professional, or you have a doctorate in classics or physics, and you want to switch into teaching in a high school classroom, you can't unless you drop out of the workforce for 2 years, enroll in an education faculty, do this degree, and then go through your certification process. So that's the other major encumbrance to alternatives like ours being able to actually offer, meaningfully different programming at scale.
So if I understand you correct, Bruce Pardy couldn't come teach at your school without having a bachelor's of education.
No, the Minister of Education couldn't teach in our school although he has a doctorate, unless he also went back to school for 2 years and got a B.Ed.
Dumb question. I assume this is a simple, albeit you got to involve government, so nothing's really that simple. But a simple change in the legislature that just says, "Oh, you don't need this,"
doesn't even need a legislative change. It's a regulation. They could change it with the stroke of a pen.
So what do I assume you've brought this concern up? They just glaze over at you, and they're like, "Yeah, sorry, Caylan, we're not doing any of that."
No, actually, it's been part of the UCP's election platform and mandate since 2019 to develop expedited and alternative pathways to teacher certification. This government apparently is working on something, but I think that the timelines for any kind of change have been pushed by the teacher strike and all the related finagling. So we'll see what they eventually come up with. look at, at a minimum, I would say right now you need, if you have an advanced degree or already a bachelor's degree, you have to go back to school for 2 years to do a B.Ed. At a minimum, we should bring that back down to 1 year. It used to be 1 year. And then Ontario had an oversupply of teachers, and they decided to raise the barrier to entry to the profession by making it a 2-year program. That was not a decision driven by pedagogical needs. It was purely about managing the supply of teachers. Every other province followed. So at a minimum, we could greatly reduce those opportunity costs, cut it back down to a 1-year program. But look, I'll go full Bruce Pardy on this. Schools should get to hire who they want. I mean, they're the ones that are ultimately accountable for their results. They know these people. They're in a better position to assess their capabilities and their credentials than a credentialing body in Edmonton. I mean, ideally, we would just have the power to hire the people that we think best to do the job.
Amen.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, I'm sitting here, I'm the government of Alberta, right? I got a real problem because the ATA is flexing its muscles. They say 51,000 members, whether that's 40,000, 51, whatever. And so you can see that they're going to push as hard as they can in the government or in the courts and different things like that. And Bruce, if I'm off on my thought process, please hop in. But worst case scenario, it goes 5 years. And then in 5 years' time, you get the same fight starts up again, correct? I think they've been legislated back to work, and the notwithstanding clause lasts for 5 years. Mm-hmm. So you have five if I'm sitting here and I'm the Alberta government, okay, we got 5 years to find a way to maybe start to change the power dynamic. One of the simple ways would be making charter schools more attractive. And what you're telling me is, well, if we could hire Bruce Pardy, which we can't right now, can you imagine if all of a sudden a bunch of professors started teaching in there? Wouldn't people be like, you say what now? And wouldn't more children go towards that avenue? Wouldn't reducing some of the roadblocks in charter schools increase the likelihood more kids go there? Which means, if I'm reading this correctly, the ATA loses memberships, and all of a sudden their power diminishes.
And all their fees. So, I mean, this is one of the reasons the ATA likes to try to pick fights with charter and independent schools is for every student who's in one of those schools, they lose some of their mandatory contributions that they get from an ATA member. So it's not about, I mean, I think a cynical read is it's not about children. It's about the fear that their own power, that their own bargaining power and leverage is going to be reduced if the relative share of charter school children increases.
Yep. Well, I haven't talked to, I could be wrong on this. Maybe you two know of somebody. I haven't talked to a single person yet that doesn't think a $71,000 starting wage, and by your 7th year as a teacher, $100,000, that is a bad wage. There's some difficulties in teaching with kids and everything.
Yeah, and that's going up to like $117,000.
Correct. Right? I can't think of a blue collar guy that's working around me that's going, oh yeah, that's a terrible wage. I can't think of one of them.
Well, but let's not lose sight of this market point, though, Sean. So I like to think of it as this: people say, well, this professional baseball player is not worth that kind of money. Well, if you can get that kind of money, he's worth that kind of money. In other words, your value depends upon the market. It depends upon the supply and demand. If somebody needs your skills, and you are one of the few people who provide those skills, then you're worth a lot of money. And if there's lots of people who can do this job, then you're not worth very much. And it's not about whether or not the number is reasonable, for all of us to think, well, they're getting this much money, they're doing this job, therefore it should be. No. The reasonableness of your pay depends upon the market.
True, but it's artificially inflated when they put the constraints on competition of.
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly the point. You cannot tell what the right price for a teacher is if you have monopolies bargaining together, right? The best policy you could make to increase and improve the fortunes of independent schools is to get the government out of the business. As long as the government is providing education out of tax dollars, you are undermining the project of having entrepreneurial schools who are running their own show because they can't compete with quote free services being provided by the taxpayer. Imagine the market that you would have as an independent private school if the government was not in the business of running public schools. Suddenly you would be able to innovate and hire the teachers that you wanted to and provide an outstanding education, and you'd have people knocking down your door. But this way, it's very hard to compete in an environment where there's a big monolith out there providing stuff for free.
Now, I haven't thought enough about my position on this, Bruce, to offer a rejoinder, but there might be a compelling public interest argument to say that the state should provide this service in some way. But that doesn't discount, I think, a lot of your other arguments about this. But I wanted to go back to a question that, Sean, you sort of just alluded to, that teachers' wages are actually pretty good, right? Prior to this agreement, teacher wages ranged from like 60,000 for someone fresh out of university with no experience to just over 100,000. Now at the top end, they'll be getting, I think, up to 17% more. So up to, if I've understood correctly,
117,000 is what I've
roughly
read
117, right? Which is pretty darn good. And then additional stipends on top of that if you take leadership roles in your school, right? So potentially up to 150 if you're, say, an administrator or something. That's not bad, considering especially that you also have benefits, ATRF added on top of that, right? Healthcare plans, ample vacation time. It's a good job, but it is becoming an increasingly difficult job.
Yes.
And the real reasons why it's becoming increasingly difficult are sort of unspeakable. And this, I think, is where there is actually some value in having a collective bargaining unit, but the collective bargaining unit is not doing what they should be doing. The real issues here that teachers will complain of in euphemistic terms are about classroom complexity. What they're actually driving at is an increased prevalence of students with serious academic, social, and behavioral issues, and a massive number of new Canadians and temporary residents who don't speak the language, where there are often major kind of cultural mismatches, or rather at least sort of issues of miscommunication or sort of different expectations. And this massively complicates the task of teaching if a third or more of your students don't speak English, and yet you're supposed to teach a class of 30.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what a collective bargaining unit should be doing in these cases is actually making the case, not just provincially, but federally, to say that the federal government, what they're doing on immigration is having these massive knock-on effects for the provincial service providers, that's totally unsustainable, and that they need to rein that in. But the collective bargaining units, as far as we know, are not making that case. Right? They're pretending that this is purely an issue of money and compensation, and it's not.
Yes, well, I'm like, it's interesting because if you're a part of the ATA, and I know I got some Alberta lovely teachers listening to this, okay? As individuals, as democracy allows us to each be able to have a voice and to vote and all the lovely things, when you remain silent on some of the biggest problems this country is facing, they have trickle-down effect that happen in our individual workplaces, on our communities, and our roads, crime, drugs, et cetera, et cetera. And part of classroom complexity is exactly that. We've got a government that keeps bringing people in, not to mention the side effects of a culture that is largely tied to the hip of a lot of different problems. Probably cell phones is in there as well, right?
Massive, yeah. So screen time, again, if I were to say what are the major issues that contribute to difficulty in the classroom size, it's a factor, but it's often overstated as a factor, right? You can actually do very effective teaching with quite large class sizes if you use the right pedagogical approaches. Really hard to do that, though, if your students are at vastly different levels, if some of them don't speak English, if some of them are highly disruptive, right? So it's not really an issue of classroom sizes as much as it is about complexity. And so complexity comes from, there's a handful of things. One, obviously, English language learners. Very difficult to provide effective differentiation. Another is the policy of inclusion that has been sort of the official ideology that teachers' colleges teach It's one of the criteria against which all Alberta teachers are judged in the teacher quality standards, is about sort of social inclusion. There's no evidence that these practices, and by inclusion I mean that students with very acute special needs are put into regular classrooms. This has been the orthodoxy over the last several years. It doesn't work. It's an abject failure. It doesn't serve any students. It's a nightmare for teachers, but often they feel uncomfortable saying that because no one wants to be seen as opposing inclusion, right? So the sort of the whole ideology of inclusion, which is totally without, it's just not backed by any kind of solid evidence. It's aspirational. Also, disruptive behaviors, a huge amount of it is screen time. So, I mean, why don't we have a full court press to try to educate parents about the deleterious impacts of screen time? No matter how good your school is, you can't compete with a student going home and spending 4 hours on video games every night. Just can't compete. Doesn't matter how good your curriculum is, how good your instruction is. That child doesn't acquire the capacity to regulate themselves emotionally. They can't self-soothe. They can't calm down. They can't sit still. They can't focus. All of that's been shot by the screen time. And then obviously the mass immigration. And another factor is, insofar as this is a matter of wages, teachers' the value of their dollar has been depleted because of inflation. Why are they continuing to vote for a party that continues to drive up inflation? Like, it's, many of these problems stem from federal government policies. Why aren't they concerned about that?
One might say self-inflicted. Yes, Bruce.
Oh, I don't disagree with any of that. It makes a lot of sense to me, but I have a larger, as you might expect, I have a larger complaint. And that is that we resort to wanting to talk about policy. Now, in the system that we have, with the situation that we're in, sure, there's a lot of bad policy that could be much, much better. But resort to policy is resort to authority, because policy is nothing but a set of rules set by somebody who's above you. And when we say we should have better policy, we're saying that the people in the bureaucracy who run the show should be making different decisions. And my point is that the decisions should be made not by a bureaucracy, not by a government, by parents, first of all, for their own kids, and the schools and the teachers that those parents send the kids to. I mean, this has nothing to do with the public. This has everything to do with individual children who have parents and teachers. And that is the circle within which the decisions about that child's education should be made. Not officials, not bureaucrats, and not offices, and not ministers. I mean, if you get rid of the idea of policy, part of our problem is we believe in having debates about policy. But policy debates assume a certain number of things that are actually not true, like that governments seek out the best results for their citizens, that they're persuaded by evidence, that they're persuaded that they're rational and reasonable. These things are not true. If we accept the power of officials to make policy, then you're bound to get bad policy. Let me put it this way. Is there anything that you can think of in modern day Canada that governments do well?
I used to think there was a bunch.
Yeah.
But then I met people such as yourselves, and I'm not spitting out any ideas right now.
If the answer is no, then it's not a matter of bad policy or better policy. It is a problem of the power to make policy. Get the government out of the business of making policy about how your children's lives should go.
Well, do you see that coming anytime soon, Bruce?
No, I do not. I
Right?
do not.
Like,
in order to get there, in order to have any shot of getting there, we have to understand what the problem is and what the goal is. Now, I understand that in the immediate future, that's not on the table. But people are not even thinking about it in that way. They're thinking about, whether or not the government or the union should prevail in this fight. Yeah, I mean, like, that's not the point.
But where we sit, I guess I look at it and I go, even if you're sitting, and once again, I'm sitting there and I'm the Alberta government, I go, okay, I want to get out of the business of education.
Yeah.
If I do that overnight, people will lose their uncontrollable shit. Full
Yes.
stop.
Yes.
So then you go, okay, the best we can do over the next 5 years till this thing ends is we could reduce the power of the ATA. And self-explanatory is the explosion of homeschooling, charter, private school. I think those are the three other options.
Why don't you just take all the restraints off all those things?
But that's
and
what I'm
let the thing
saying.
go? Yeah.
You could, if all it is a signature, and you could all of a sudden start reducing it. Because I've heard Danielle Smith talk about how she wants the funding to follow the child. Correct?
Sure.
Like, I'm not off in saying that. So you go, okay, you've just had this fight. You can see how they're lining it up for every union to come after you. You could sit there and go, well, why don't we, with a stroke of a pen, reduce some of the handcuffs on Caylan and others, make it more easily accessible for them to grow. And if they grow, that means kids leave, which means there's less jobs. And if you're a teacher, you're going to go where the work is, and you get attracted to a different form of education. And in 5 years' time, now you can start to build the scenario where the Alberta government can just step a little bit back out of it. Now, that takes some vision, some time, a whole bunch of things. But just, I don't disagree with, like, you got to identify the root cause of the problem and try and address it. It's just that one takes years to get to, doesn't it?
But I like that strategy, Sean. That makes a lot of sense to me, as long as it's done with purpose. I mean, if the purpose is to get to the end result, and you think you have to do it strategically in a step-by-step way, fair enough. That's great. But as long as all these things are not stopgap measures that are just forgotten after you get there.
I diagnose the root cause of this differently than Bruce. I don't think that power is necessarily an evil. I don't think that lawmakers are necessarily bad. I don't know if that's what you're saying, Bruce, if you'd go quite so far, but I would diagnose a large part of the problem as we have malformed elites. And we've had a couple generations of malformed elites. When you say, can you think of anything that the government does well? Increasingly, like Sean, I have to say no. And I think a lot of that, I think we have a massive crisis of competence that is just now starting to become apparent, but is at least one or two generations in the making, and will only get worse. Mm-hmm. Very hard to find actually competent people, and that's going to get a lot worse. So part of my solution is, okay, well, how do you fix education? And I come to a lot of the same sort of policy prescriptions that you've just alluded to. I like choice in education, not as an end, but as a means to an end, which is it creates the space for people to try to do things better. And that space is necessary if you want to do things better. So I like the space, right? And so I'll advocate for the government to get off our backs so that we can try to do things right, so that we can, in our own little sphere of influence, try to sort of stem the tide of what's been happening to the formation of our citizens.
That is a route when you think about it. Like, I just, once again, a strategy or not, I don't know if they should just come in tomorrow and do what Bruce, like, just done. We're out, and you can go wherever you want. I assume in today's society, it takes a few more steps, because if I've watched anything of society, at times they need to be led by a carrot, right? They got to, and when you look at this, you go, okay, we're just going to sign a piece of paper that says now, instead of it taking a 2-year or 4-year or whatever your degree is to become a teacher at the Classical Academy, now you can go out and hire a professor. Oh,
and you know what?
And all of a sudden that opens up. Oh, you got problems with funding. Interesting. Well, what's the problems with funding? Oh, that seems like a relatively easy fix. Bruce, you're laughing at me, but I look at that and I just go, if I'm sitting as the Alberta government, I just had this huge thing. 51,000 teachers. We're giving them I don't even know now. I'm looking at this. I'm going 12% raise over 4 years. Okay. Up to 17%, 3,000 new teachers, 1,500 educational assistants, 2.6 billion in total new funding. The funding for schools went from 5.3 billion in 2015 and stayed relatively stagnant for 4 years under the NDP.
Yep.
And since then is going to be over $10 billion. We have a problem. Houston, we have a problem.
Yeah. And that line about adding 3,000 new teachers is a great opportunity to change the way that we handle teacher certification.
All reasonable, but one of the difficulties for my money is this: that the crisis in competence that Caylan refers to, which is very real, and the crisis in ideological capture that has happened to our institutions, including our educational institutions, over a long period of time, all of that has happened incrementally over a long period of time. I do not think that it can be reversed incrementally. It has to be done cold turkey, because you have to declare what it is that's happened and say, we're not doing this anymore. You can't continue to pretend to play the same game that the incrementalists have been playing for decades now, essentially, and get yourself out of this. You have to reframe the situation. And yeah, it's going to be difficult because people are not used to that. But the proposition on the table is, you can't fix this incrementally. If that's the case, then how do you do it in a cold turkey kind of way?
You're feeding back the argument I just had with a buddy of mine on politics in Canada. I'm annoyed with Pierre Poilievre because he says some right things. Right?
Yes.
There's some times
Yes.
where I'm like, wow, that's great. There's other times I'm like, I don't need you to tell me what you're going to do when you're like 12 years down the road. It's like,
Yep.
address the problems we got going on right now.
Right.
And just give it blunt to the audience. Like
Yes.
it's a pretty stark situation we find ourselves in.
Yes.
And his argument was my argument just to you now. He's like, people can't handle that. Bruce, can people handle that?
I don't know, but it's like, okay, so if the Titanic's going down,
Yeah, dude. It's
And-
just
and-
going
and-
down
sorry, wait.
incrementally. It's not
you
that
don't
big
want
a
to you
deal.
don't want to tell the people that the boat is sinking. Just tell them to move up to a higher deck, and don't tell them why. I mean, no, get to the lifeboats because the thing is going down. Okay, if you got a way to fix this, then get on with it. And if you don't, well, then we'll just all piddle in the margins and let the thing go down.
To be clear, I'm not a piddler in the margins.
No, I wasn't accusing you of that.
Temperamentally,
No, no,
I'm not
no.
a margin piddler. But I think, but my prescription, Bruce, would be, I mean, I think political power is, it's not that I wish it was gone. It's just that I wish that it was wielded with a great deal more.
Oh, okay. This is excellent because Caylan and I in this session have basically agreed about everything, pretty much. But here's the moment where we see what the difference is. I mean, I'm going to try to articulate the difference. Okay. And Caylan, you can obviously correct me if I get this wrong. So Caylan's complaint is that we have the wrong elite in power, that the wrong people have the power to make the wrong decisions, and we would be fixed if the right people had the same power to make correct decisions. My complaint is people shouldn't have the power to make these kinds of decisions, and that's the difference between us.
Caylan?
Look, this could turn into a very long conversation, and I don't think that we have time for that this afternoon. That is a not unreasonable characterization of the difference between Bruce and I. It's a little bit simplistic.
Sure.
And where I would sort of have a slight quibble maybe is I don't want government to have excessive power over our lives either. I'm sympathetic to certain of the libertarian impulses that Bruce espouses. But I think that the way to achieve a greater state of sort of liberty isn't to sort of try to eliminate moral guardrails or positive law or the state's involvement in our lives wholesale. I think it depends on cultivating a virtuous citizenry who are actually qualified for the exercise and preservation of liberty. So I think we also are like-minded to a certain degree in our love of liberty and our dislike of onerous government intervention in our lives. But we also have different routes by which we would try to achieve that.
Yeah, well, that's why I enjoy talking with each one of you so much. Is you're very thoughtful of the approach you're taking, and they both hold or carry water, in my opinion. I just go back and now, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about this blunt thing. If I bring it back to the teachers for us, it would be pretty blunt, Bruce, to sign a couple pieces of paper that say the funding is going to follow the kid, and we're going to take the shackles off charter schools to get funding, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That would be pretty blunt, and I would assume over the course of 5 years, which in the history of the world is less than a blink of an eye, you would see a huge change in the education of kids K to 12 almost overnight. Now, it would take 5 years or maybe longer, but people are funny. Where's your kid going to school? Well, actually, I'll change it. Hockey. Where's your kid playing hockey this year? Oh, he's playing here. Why'd he go there? Oh, all these things. And then all of a sudden, next year, you see a few more leave. And then a few more leave. And if you were to sign a couple pieces of paper, that would be a relatively blunt way of doing it as the Alberta government that would open up an opportunity for families to take their kids elsewhere. And if I'm not mistaken, Caylan, please explain this to me if I'm wrong, on charter schools. The cost to the family to come to a charter school is zero, is it not?
Yeah, so we have no tuition.
No tuition.
Like other public schools, students may pay nominal fees for school supplies,
Sure.
extracurriculars, things like that, but there's no tuition.
Right. So to be clear, I mean, I think charter schools are way better than standard public schools. I mean, there's no contest there. But there's still a problem with charter schools, which is that they are still paid for by the state. They're still paid for by taxpayer money. They're still controlled and supervised by the government. So if you really wanted to do the kind of change we're talking about, you wouldn't have charter schools either. I have no objection to traveling down that road, because that's a much better road than the one we're on. But
Bruce, is everything, so in your scenario, everything is private, it's at market rates. Presumably you also have active, voluntary, philanthropic organizations, right, that sort of provide scholarships, that fund students who are disadvantaged. That's the scenario, but it's a totally open private market.
It's a market in education, like we have markets in everything else, and you will get the right product because people will choose the product. People are going to send their kids to school. They're going to be able to afford something or not, and what they can afford depends upon what school the kid will go to. I mean, this is the only alternative to having somebody in an office decide things for you. There are only those two choices. And so the alternative to say, well, but we have to ensure, equal access and the same treatment and these standards. Well, what you're doing there is appealing to the authority of somebody to decide those things.
Yeah, well, and look, I'll argue your side of this a little bit, in the sense that I think one of the reasons why the scenario that I just proposed, which you've, I think, agreed to, would be shocking to many people, is because it would offend their sense of justice.
Yes.
That students with fewer means,
sure,
but maybe equal ability, don't have access to high quality education.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I mean, in arguing your side of this, I will say that is the status quo right now. The Calgary Board of Education, for example, or any large school board, is highly segregated by socioeconomic bracket. And if you look at, the Fraser Institute creates a great visual map of school rankings in several different provinces. If you look at the map of Calgary, the areas that are more socioeconomically depressed, which have more newer Canadians and immigrants, they're full of failing schools. There's basically no good schools in an entire quadrant of the city. The good schools are concentrated in wealthy areas.
Mm-hmm.
So it's already extremely segregated in that way, but you would expect to see a great deal more segregation under the system that you're proposing. So how would you answer the people whose sense of justice is offended by this?
Your life is your life. That's just too bad. I'm sorry, that's a blunt answer, but it's no coincidence that this pattern that you're describing, which is absolutely correct, is the same kind of pattern in a different way that you see in the single-payer healthcare system. The whole premise of the healthcare system is, well, everybody has to have equal access. We cannot allow anybody to be able to buy their own healthcare. Well, but they do. They go down to the States. The people who are able get much better care by using their own money to go down to the US. Right? You're not preventing differentiated treatment. You're just making it very difficult for everybody to get good care because it's run by a bureaucracy that doesn't provide resources. Right? So we would all be better off. My case would be, we would all be better off with a private healthcare system in the same way we'd be better off with a private a private education system, because the market always provides what the market needs, what the market will buy, and so on and so forth. You can think of all the institutions down the line. The idea.
If I go to hockey right now, I love, you both know me. I love my sports, right? And hockey is that way already. if it's become this sport where if you have lots of money, your kid doesn't play in the local minor hockey. You send them off to an academy at a crazy young age now, I might add, and you're
Sure.
paying tens of thousands of dollars for it. And it's like, well, can anybody afford that? Well, no. And do you need to do that? I have no idea. My kids definitely aren't old enough to know the answer to that. But you're seeing the private industry in hockey change the sport in general. So if you go to a model of everything being private, you are going to have the higher echelon where people are willing to pay $80,000 or whatever it is to have Bruce Pardy be the lead guy teaching your kid. Whereas, it might be more like $100 to be in the school with Sean Newman. But in fairness, like maybe that's okay.
But let's just acknowledge the alternative, the public alternative we're talking about. That public alternative, and we don't even notice this because we're so used to it, but the public alternative to these things is to require other people to pay for your child's education. That's what we're talking about when we say, well, it's not equitable, for some people because their parents can't afford this. Like what you're saying is those taxpayers, some of whom have no children and have no interest in this.
They do have an interest in it, Bruce.
Yeah, no.
This is the crux of the issue here.
Right. Well, but
I think there is a public interest benefit in having an educated citizenry who are not, engaged in criminal activity.
Boy, here we go.
We're going to contribute positively to your society. Do I need to recite John Donne to you? No man is an island, Bruce. We have a compelling interest in the formation of our fellow citizens.
But you're pursuing that compelling interest with force. In other words, you are requiring people to pay taxes to fulfill what you perceive as their interest in the public good. Okay. But the bottom line is they are being compelled against their will to do what you want them to do, which they don't want to do.
No, so the bottom line is they're not being compelled to do what I want to do. They're being compelled to support what people who are not really qualified to make determinations about the public interest decide is in the public interest.
But that is everybody.
Again, this goes back to how you characterize the difference between us. I think there is a real public interest in education, maybe even in public education. But the people who do things like setting our curriculum, setting teacher standards, deciding how teachers should be certified, what people should be brought into the profession, all of these decisions, I think they lack the philosophical and intellectual formation to actually make good judgments about what constitutes the public interest. So we end up with bad curricula, bad teacher training programs, bad teacher quality assurance programs, right? So again, I think it's that we haven't defined the parameters in a way that is coherent, and we get this sort of mess where we're producing curricula that teach people to hate their own civilization. That's certainly not in the public interest.
I don't disagree. But if your proposition is correct, then all what's on the table is to take those particular people out who are making the bad policy and put other people in with the power to make same kinds of policy, which is better content. That to me is not a change, right?
I'll be a little bit just because we're winding down on time here. I'll start to say the provocative things. Can
I just say, why did I wait so long to put you two together? Carry on, Caylan.
Well, I just said, I think there might be a public interest benefit in public education. Public education, of course, is a relatively, in history's scale, relatively recent invention. It's largely a product of kind of American, kind of upper Northeast American, New Englandish sensibilities. And it was an attempt to democratize an institution that historically has been extremely aristocratic, right? Liberal education is an education for the leisured classes. And so I think American education reformers were confronted with this question of how do we make this good available to people who don't belong to the leisured classes, i.e. not to the aristocracy.
Sure.
And so we end up with public education as a universal sort of right, entitlement, expectation. I think there's something to be said. And Bruce, I wonder if we should actually hash this out in some forum of whether the era of universal public education needs to come to an end. And one of the main things that makes me think that is AI.
Right. Yeah.
AI is just, it's insofar as it's basically being, it's kind of primary application to date of large language models is to allow students to cheat on homework.
Right.
What is the point?
Right.
If basically you have huge portions of students self-selecting and saying, I actually have no interest in my intellectual development, we're normalizing lying as part of this process. What is the purpose then? I think that's actually could be a very interesting conversation to have.
I agree.
Well, why
I
don't
agree.
we just schedule it, folks, and we'll do it again? We won't put a time constraint, so you can say provocative things at any point in time, knowing that there's no clock on it. I'd be happy to have that discussion on here. Bruce, any final thoughts before we end
Okay,
today's
so
discussion?
I'll just lob a big one. There is no such thing as the common good, because good is not common to everybody. Every public policy has winners and losers. Every policy you make is going to be to the detriment of somebody and the benefit of somebody else. Okay, and that's the thing you do not want your public officials to be doing. You want to be able to pursue your own interest by yourself, and if that means that you want to support people, children getting an education, and you have money, then you should do that. And if you don't, then you shouldn't have to. In other words, your property is supposed to be your business. But we've reached the stage.
Wait, Bruce, what if your property is 400 images of child pornography?
Oh no, that's not what I'm talking about. I mean,
No, of course it's not. Just like you don't really support consensual cannibalism.
I don't support it, but I don't think you should be able to restrict it.
People's heads are going, what is happening here in the last 2 minutes of this conversation? We
Well,
started
so let's just fill people in. Let's fill.
Bruce and I have a history.
So Caylan and I have history. We debated. Basically we held a debate between the conservative and libertarian or classical liberal.
There is a common good, right? I took the position that there is in fact a common good, that it's incumbent on policymakers, on lawmakers to be able to sort of clearly articulate it, to enact policy in a coherent way, flowing from an understanding of the common good. Bruce thinks this way lies sort of peril and danger, and power itself is the problem.
That's fair.
Well, folks, you've gotten an hour of these two together. Appreciate you hopping on. I go, let's continue this conversation, because now I'm kind of curious about where you left it. Not the cannibalism part, sorry, or the pornography part, because I'm like, the common good, that right there, Bruce, I'm like, I don't know, I got to pick your brain on that one, because I'm like, I could see Caylan's head. I'm going, I don't know about that one. In saying that, I'd be interested in facilitating that conversation if you're both willing. Either
Sounds
way,
good.
thank you for coming on the show and both being here.
Always a pleasure.
Pleasure.